Please subscribe and share for more story. 6 days after signing away $62 million, Marianne Cole, a 71-year-old business founder, stood frozen as her suitcase struck the wet concrete of the driveway. Her daughter, Marianne Cole, had thrown it without hesitation. Rain clung to the long curve of the estate road, and the iron gates of Willow Crest slid shut behind Marianne with mechanical precision. The sound was clean, final. Marianne did not cry. She simply watched the gate close, understanding in that instant that her life had been divided into two parts: everything she had built before and the exile that had just begun. "You don't live here anymore," Vivian had said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Marianne remembered the tone more than the words: flat, efficient, stripped of affection. "This is my house now. My company. My name." She turned away before Marianne could respond. The gate locked with a quiet click, sealing the statement. Marianne stood there, rain soaking the shoulders of her coat, feeling something settle deep inside her chest. It wasn't grief. It was the sharp realization that devotion, when taken for granted, could be discarded without remorse. The suitcase lay on its side near the storm drain, black leather scuffed, brass edges dulled with age. It had belonged to her late husband, a gift from decades earlier, carried through airports, boardrooms, and hotel lobbies when the company was still fragile and unknown. Vivian had thrown it hard, deliberately, under the unblinking eye of the security camera. The housekeeper stood frozen nearby, and on the stone steps, Lena, Vivian's 16-year-old daughter, stared in horror, her hand clamped over her mouth. "You don't belong here anymore," Vivian repeated, louder this time, as if clarity required volume. Marianne opened her mouth, then closed it. No argument would land where love had already been withdrawn. The gate shut before a single word escaped her throat. The rain misted her face. The house loomed behind the metal bars, warm, bright, and suddenly unreachable. No one moved. Not Lena. Not the housekeeper. Not Marianne. Time stretched until it became uncomfortable and then meaningless. At last, Marianne bent down, her knees protesting, and lifted the suitcase. The weight surprised her, not because it was heavy, but because it felt like the sum of her life compressed into one object. She turned and walked down the driveway without looking back. As she moved away from the house she had paid for, protected, and named, a burning heat rose behind her eyes. The tears did not fall. What rose instead was disbelief, the kind that comes when the person you raised with care and sacrifice decides you are no longer useful. Marianne reached the end of the driveway and stopped, unsure where to go. The street looked unfamiliar now, as if it belonged to another life. The old bus stop she remembered had been removed years earlier, replaced by a cold metal bench bolted to the sidewalk. She lowered herself onto it slowly, placing the suitcase at her feet. Her hands trembled, not from the chill, but from the pressure building inside her chest. 43 years of work. 43 years of sacrifice. She replayed Vivian's voice again and again. My house. My company. Marianne had built that company from borrowed desks and unpaid nights, signing her first contracts with shaking hands and unshakable resolve. She had believed giving Vivian control was love. Sitting there in the rain, she finally understood the cost of confusing trust with surrender. 15 minutes later, footsteps slapped against wet pavement. Marianne looked up to see Lena running barefoot down the driveway, her hair loose, her breath uneven. The girl stopped abruptly, eyes red, hands shaking.
She didn't speak.
She simply slipped a thick gray sweatshirt over Marianne's shoulders and placed a crumpled paper bag beside her. Inside were a bottle of water and a hastily wrapped sandwich. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered, her voice breaking. Marianne reached for her hand, but Lena had already stepped back. Fear flashed across her face, not of Marianne, but of being seen. Without another word, she turned and ran toward the house. Marianne clutched the paper bag to her chest. In that moment, the small act of kindness outweighed the millions she had signed away. Someone still remembered who she was. That night, Marianne checked into a roadside motel on the edge of town. The door paint peeled. The bathroom light flickered and buzzed like an insect trapped behind glass.
She didn't complain.
She sat at the small desk with a legal pad and pen, staring at the blank page until the noise in her mind settled. Sleep never came. Instead, memory sharpened. She began writing dates, documents, names of attorneys, exact phrases she remembered from contracts signed decades earlier. This wasn't grief. It was inventory. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, one name surfaced with absolute clarity: Harold Fenwick. Her first lawyer. The one she trusted before Vivian replaced him with sleek strangers in expensive suits. Harold had once warned her, calmly, that control was never truly gone as long as the grantor lived and remained clear-minded. Marianne stopped writing. She read that sentence again in her head. And for the first time since the gate closed, she smiled, just barely. At 7:12 a.m., Marianne dialed Harold's number. He answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call," he said quietly. By mid-morning, she sat across from him in his modest office, sunlight catching dust in the air. Marianne placed a thin folder on the desk. "She thinks she owns everything," Marianne said evenly. Harold adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. "She doesn't," he replied. "You never signed the final revocation." Marianne exhaled slowly. Vivian had rushed the transfer, focused on titles and appearances, never noticing the clause that mattered most. She was a co-trustee, not the final authority. "I want this done quietly," Marianne said. "No confrontation. No warnings." Harold nodded. "Then we start with numbers." He reached for the phone and called a forensic accountant he trusted. Marianne leaned back in her chair, the rage inside her cooling into something far more dangerous: focus. 3 days later, Marianne moved into a short-term rental near the coast. The ocean outside was gray and restless, matching her thoughts. She paid in cash, left her name off the lease, and unpacked only what she needed. That night, she slept for 7 uninterrupted hours. When she woke, she brewed strong coffee and opened her notebook to a clean page. She wrote one sentence at the top in firm, deliberate letters. "She erased my name. I will restore it." This was not revenge. It was correction. She had not built her life on noise or cruelty. She built it on patience, observation, and timing. Vivian had mistaken silence for weakness. That misunderstanding would cost her everything. The call came on the 4th day. "She's moved nearly 10 million, the accountant reported calmly. Shell companies. Private accounts. 2 properties transferred illegally." Marianne closed her eyes. The betrayal had structure. Intent. Planning. "That's the breach," Harold confirmed later. "Clear and documented." Marianne stared out at the ocean, the wind pressing hard against the windows. She thought of Lena's face on the steps. She thought of the suitcase hitting the pavement. This wasn't just financial theft. It was erasure. "Proceed," Marianne said. But slowly. Harold understood. The most effective power didn't announce itself. That evening, Marianne sat on the balcony as the wind whipped off the Pacific. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Lena. "I miss you. Are you okay?" Marianne's chest tightened. She typed, deleted, then typed again. "I'm okay. I love you." She pressed send and set the phone down. The path ahead was clear now. Vivian had tried to bury her quietly. Instead, she had awakened something precise and unstoppable. The performance her daughter believed was over had barely begun. By the end of the week, Harold had prepared the first set of documents. They were clean, quiet, and devastating. Marianne reviewed them at the small kitchen table of the rental, the ocean murmuring outside like a steady witness. Vivian would not be alerted. No letters. No warnings. The request to audit the trust would arrive through official channels, wrapped in neutral language and legal formality. Marianne preferred it that way. Loud confrontations gave people time to lie. Silence forced them to reveal themselves. As she signed her approval, she remembered teaching Vivian patience as a child, how to wait, how to watch. Somewhere along the way, Vivian had learned only how to take. The neighbor's call came unexpectedly. Rosa Alvarez, who lived 2 houses down from the estate, asked to meet at a small park near the old bandstand. When Marianne arrived, Rosa was already there, holding her phone with both hands. "I didn't know if I should record," Rosa said softly, "but something felt wrong." She pressed play. The video showed everything: the suitcase, the rain, Vivian's cold voice, Lena frozen in the doorway. Marianne watched without flinching. When it ended, she nodded once. "May I have a copy?" she asked. Rosa sent it without question. Justice, Marianne realized, often arrived quietly through ordinary people. That night, Marianne watched the video again and again until the phone battery died. The pain had transformed into clarity. This was no longer just about money or legal authority. It was about conduct, character, abuse of power. She called Harold. "We had an ethics complaint," she said. He paused only a second. "Understood." The case expanded, not louder, but deeper. Each layer revealed a pattern Vivian could no longer explain away. The board meeting date appeared in Marianne's inbox 2 weeks later. Vivian had forgotten to remove her from internal distribution lists. A small oversight. A fatal one. Marianne smiled faintly as she marked the date in her notebook. That meeting would not be about confrontation. It would be about presence. About reminding people who laid the first stone when the ground was unstable and the future uncertain. On the morning of the meeting, Marianne dressed with care. Navy blazer. Simple pearl studs. Hair pinned neatly back. She wasn't dressing to impress. She was dressing to remember herself. The building had changed, cold glass, muted signage, but the bones were the same. She had bought it during a recession when everyone else fled. The receptionist hesitated when Marianne gave her name, then stood abruptly. "Of course," she said. "Please, this way." Vivian froze when she saw her mother enter the boardroom. "Mother," she said carefully. "I wasn't aware." Marianne said nothing. She took her seat near the center of the table, placed her folder down, and folded her hands. Harold entered moments later. The room shifted. No words were needed. The reckoning had arrived, not with noise, but with undeniable presence. Vivian froze the moment she saw her mother step into the boardroom. The confident rhythm of her presentation faltered mid-sentence, her hand still hovering near the remote. "Mother," Vivian said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us today." Marianne did not answer. She walked calmly to the table, placed her folder down, pulled out the chair nearest the center, and sat. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate. She folded her hands and lifted her gaze. That was all. Yet the air in the room shifted. Several board members glanced at one another, surprise flickering across their faces. This was not part of the agenda they had been given. 2 minutes later, Harold entered, briefcase in hand, nodding respectfully to the room before taking the seat beside Marianne. Vivian straightened, regaining composure, and clicked the presentation forward. Numbers filled the screen.
Growth.
Expansion. Confidence. But Marianne watched closely, noting what was said and what was avoided. Vivian spoke smoothly, rehearsed and precise, outlining quarterly margins and future acquisitions. She avoided looking directly at Marianne, addressing the room instead. Some board members nodded. Others leaned back, disengaged. When Vivian reached her final slide, she referenced funds not yet cleared and properties not yet finalized, speaking as though ownership were already certain. Harold waited. He did not interrupt. He allowed her to finish. When the last slide faded, he stood calmly. "Before the board proceeds," Harold said evenly, "there is a matter that requires immediate attention." He distributed sealed folders around the table. Inside were transaction logs, ownership filings, trust documents, and a clean financial trail linking shell companies directly to Vivian. Silence settled heavily. Papers rustled. One board member adjusted his glasses, reading twice. Another frowned. Harold continued, his voice steady. "These transactions represent a breach of fiduciary duty by a co-trustee." Vivian opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Vivian recovered quickly, standing to object. "These documents are being misinterpreted," she said sharply. "Everything was done legally." Harold did not argue. Instead, he placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. The video filled the screen. Rain, suitcase, Vivian's voice cold and final, Lena frozen in the doorway. A gasp escaped one board member. Another whispered, "My God." The room absorbed the footage in stunned silence. When it ended, no one spoke for several seconds. "This conduct," Harold said quietly, "raises serious ethical concerns and reputational risk." Marianne remained seated, eyes forward, hands still.
She did not need to look at Vivian.
The truth was doing the work for her. The compliance consultant cleared his throat. "Given the evidence," he said, "I move that Ms. Cole's trustee authority be suspended immediately, pending review." A vote was called. Hands rose one by one. 8 in favor. 2 abstained. None opposed. Vivian stood frozen, her face pale, lips parted but silent. The chairwoman turned to Marianne. "Do you wish to add anything?" Marianne rose slowly. She removed a single page from her folder and placed it on the table. "The trust was never dissolved," she said calmly. "It was only mismanaged." Nothing more was needed. The meeting adjourned quickly. Outside, reporters gathered, sensing a shift they didn't yet understand. Marianne exited first, Harold remaining behind to finalize paperwork. The elevator ride down was silent. In the lobby, the receptionist stood uncertain, then nodded respectfully. Marianne stepped into the wind without hesitation. She did not feel victorious. She felt restored.
That
evening, she checked into a quiet hotel, ordered tea, and watched the skyline soften into dusk. She had not begged. She had not shouted. She had simply shown up, and the structure she built had remembered her. By morning, headlines whispered of an unexpected reinstatement and a suspended executive. Arthur called just after 9. The injunction had been granted. Accounts frozen. Transfers under review. An audit launched. Marianne thanked him and hung up. Later, she walked past the first storefront she had ever owned, now rebranded beyond recognition. She didn't go inside. She smiled faintly and kept walking. This chapter was no longer about reclaiming space. It was about setting the record straight. And the work was not finished. That afternoon, Marianne received the first handwritten letter. It arrived at the hotel front desk in a plain envelope with no return address, but she recognized the careful looping script immediately. It was from Lena. Inside were only a few lines, written neatly, as if choosing the right words mattered more than filling the page. "I saw what happened. I don't know how to feel. Mom hasn't talked to me since. I miss you. I'm scared." Marianne held the letter for a long time before sitting at the desk to reply. She did not write about court filings, audits, or trust language. Instead, she wrote about the summer they built a dollhouse together on the porch, about scraped knees and ice cream, about the morning Lena brought burnt toast on a tray and called it breakfast in bed. "You don't have to choose sides," Marianne wrote, "but you always deserve the truth." She sealed the envelope knowing memory was the safest place to begin. Over the next week, the findings deepened. The accountant uncovered additional shell companies, unauthorized loans, and intellectual property quietly rebranded under Vivian's name alone. This was not panic-driven theft. It was systematic, deliberate. Harold presented the expanded report to the board. Formal charges were drafted: misrepresentation, abuse of fiduciary authority, breach of trust. Marianne hesitated briefly, not from fear, but from restraint. She did not want to destroy her daughter. She wanted the lie to stop. When Harold asked if she wished to proceed, Marianne nodded once. "Yes," she said. "We move forward." 3 hours later, Vivian's lawyers released a statement denying wrongdoing and accusing the firm of irregular conduct. Marianne read it without emotion and closed the file. Noise always came before collapse. That evening, Marianne walked alone through the city streets, lights shimmering against the pavement. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only clarity. This was not revenge. It was removal, the careful stripping away of false authority until truth stood exposed. Vivian remained silent, no calls, no messages. That silence told Marianne everything she needed to know. Her daughter wasn't preparing an apology. She was waiting. But Marianne no longer feared what came next. She had reclaimed her footing, her voice, and her name. The foundation she built decades earlier still stood, solid and undeniable. Others had simply forgotten who laid it. On the final morning of the week, Marianne packed her suitcase slowly. Not to run, but to return, on her own terms. She paused by the window, watching the city wake. She had not shouted. She had not begged. She had corrected a wrong with patience and proof. The world she built had remembered her, and more importantly, she had remembered herself. Whatever followed next would be faced with the same quiet strength that built everything in the first place. And this time, no one would mistake her silence for weakness again. Thanks for watching. If you value stories of respect, dignity, and justice, please subscribe. It means more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing the lessons life has carved into me.